listening to Radio Sputnik. Telling the untold.
And we are live from America and just outside the Matrix. It is time once again for the show that brings you the truth behind the headlines. I'm investigative journalist Lee Stranahan, and this is The Backstory. Okay, so Rod, once again, we made it to another Friday. And when I say made it, of course, I mean there was no World War III, right? We got through without that.
Yeah, that imminent invasion hasn't happened yet.
Right. And by the way, did you see there was a breaking headline that the intelligence community, and they are the best kind of community, the intelligence community came out and said they're sure that Vladimir Putin is about to invade Ukraine at any minute. He's decided, they figured out. The intelligence community, who also figured out that Hunter Biden's laptop was an imagination fever dream of conspiracy created by Russia. Remember that? The intelligence community came out and said that one, Rod?
Yeah, the most trustworthy community that we know.
Right. So I did see this as a headline, that Putin's decided to invade Ukraine. It's on. He's throwing down. Now I'm a little skeptical myself, and we'll talk about why, but I'm going to point out that we are on a Friday. It's the last show of the week. And not this coming Monday, but the Monday after that is a holiday. Right, Saul? Am I correct? Your multifaceted friend?
Yeah, President's Day.
Right. Yes, that's right. But it's not this Monday. It's a week from Monday. So everyone chill out. We'll be here Monday. You know, no nuclear war willing. And did you see Biden saying, did you see his report with Lester Holt, his interview, where he said, if U.S. and Russian troops start shooting at each other, it's World War III. Did you see that, Rod?
Yeah, I saw that. And also, I guess the viral clip was that we can't unite Iraq, Afghanistan.
But here's what I said about that. He did misspeak thrice. That's 3 times for those of you keeping track of dorky ways to say numbers at home. But he did misspeak thrice, except he was correct every time, because they're not going to unite Ukraine or Iraq or Afghanistan. So all of them, did you notice that, Rod? All of them were accurate, even though he was wrong the first 2 times. Does that make sense?
Yeah, no, I'm with you on that part. It's just that he wasn't able to keep pace with what country they were talking about.
Yes, and as I pointed out, of the last 7 presidents, I added it up. I believe my math is correct on this. Of the last 7 presidents, we've had 2. That would be Ronald Reagan and Joe Biden, who've shown signs of dementia while in office. Think about that. 2 out of 7. That's pretty good. Right?
Yeah, no, but I would say that at least Ronald Reagan seemed a little bit more coherent, where Joe Biden seems like if you just put him in another building, he might not even know where he's at.
Well, and the thing about Biden, where Biden does beat Reagan, is it's in his first term. Reagan, what I think started to happen was in Reagan's second term, you start to see less of him, and you start to see more of Nancy and the astrologers. Does that make sense? I think that's what's going.
After he got shot. After he got shot.
Right. Which, being shot will take it out of you. I hear. I've never been shot. You've never been shot, have you, Rod?
I've never been hit.
Oh, really? You never been hit? So watch out. So the next time I say there's going to be invasion, I should say that Saul's going to hit you, not that you're going to hit Saul. Because it's more likely. Saul, when was the last time you were in a fight? Be honest.
You said
high school. In probably high school.
I'm asking Saul. Saul, it was high school, which was just a year ago, right? Because you're a young guy.
Yeah, I just graduated.
There we go. But there we go. So I'm just saying, Rod, that if something's going to happen, Saul's got a history of fights, right? And you said you've never been hit, and right there,
I've never been hit by a bullet. I mean, I've been with people who've been shot at, so I've been in that vicinity, but I've never been hit by a bullet.
Okay, but have you been hit?
Yeah, of course.
Okay, of course. You say that. I actually don't remember getting punched. I do remember there was a manager at a Domino's Pizza I worked at in Windsor, Connecticut, who got mad at me and threw me on a car. He grabbed me, but he grabbed me by the scruff of my neck, and he threw me on a car. I should have sued him, but, you know, I was 19, and 19-year-olds don't really sue a lot of people. But let's talk about the show and do the booms. Great show today you put together for us. Scott Ritter, former UN weapons inspector of some note, and he's been in hoax run-up situations before. And he's a former Marine as well and understands military stuff. And in the second hour, the great Kim Iverson will be joining us. And all throughout the show, and he could be on the line right now, is our friend Mark Frost. It's a Frosty Friday. Hey, Mark, how you doing?
Greetings on Frosty Fridays.
No, greetings to you, too. And we're glad to have you. And we, as usual, you're an, you know, prog rock drummer, educator, entrepreneur. Then I have to, the way I remember it is with mnemonic devices, Mark. It's the E's for you. You're an educator, you're an entrepreneur, and you're an economist. These are words with an E this time. I've not. Do you write poetry, actually, or doggerel?
Well, of course. Of course. You know I've tried to be Neil Peart, so failed miserably.
How did that work for you? Yeah, it was okay. Have you tried writing just shorter work like haiku or something like that?
I'll send you my latest one.
Okay, please do. Because you did send me a picture of you looking like Peter Frampton. We talked about that last week, and you sent that to me.
I did.
Mark,
yes.
Because you had to listen through a bunch of gibberish there. So I'll let you say the name of the show and bring on the floor, Tom.
The backstory.
Does that sound like a timpani or a floor? When you hear that sound, it's some deep drum thud.
It's two things. It's a timpani with a sizzle cymbal.
There we go. Yes, by sizzle cymbal you mean one that's got little
rivets.
Rivets, yes. Sizzling around, yes. Very good.
Some people use chains, but usually it's rivets.
Yes. Do you have any of those, by the way?
I have one.
There we go. And who makes it?
Feisty.
Feisty, I was going to guess Feisty. Yeah.
All my cymbals are Feisty. That's just a thing. I've never, ever owned a Zildjian cymbal, ever.
Ever? You've never, not a pair of New Beat hi-hats, even? Very popular hi-hats.
No, because the hi-hats I love so much are Sound Edge by Feisty. So, like, if I bought a new drum set tomorrow, the first thing I do would be to go buy a new set of hi-hats.
And by the way, we do have very enjoyable drummer nerd talk whenever Mark Frost is on. Because I'm a bad drummer, but I own equipment. So I know a bit about the equipment. Do you know what I was watching the other night, Mark? And I think he's underrated because of the band he was in, which people don't think of as a musician's band, although it kind of is the band Journey.
Oh, yes, Ainsley Dunbar.
Well, Ainsley Dunbar in the early stuff, but even Steve Smith in the pop part of Journey was a very good jazz drummer. He's a very good drummer.
Well, yeah, Charlie Watts was a good drummer. He just never had to use his goodness that often. But he was a good drummer.
Yes, whereas Ginger Baker sort of overused it, shall we say. Do you think Ginger Baker overplayed?
No, I think Ginger Baker really invented progressive drums, to be honest.
Yes, and of course he was, as you know, Ginger Baker was a real jazz drummer, like Kim Iverson. By the way, it's a dual drum show. Well done, because Kim Iverson is a jazz drummer as well. So we might get into some drum talk with Kim. It's possible, Mark. But
well,
I want to play.
I'm a jazz drummer myself.
There we go. She plays, you know, traditional grip, not match grip. So there. But
matter of fact,
Saul,
everybody.
I got to ask Saul one thing. Saul, do we have more clips from yesterday we didn't get to?
Yeah, we have a whole bunch. But Rod sent a Wendy Sherman clip.
Yes, the Wendy Sherman clip I'm going to save for when Scott Ritter's on. Wendy Sherman is she's in the State Department. I forget what her official role is. She's like an assistant something. But she's a State Department official. And she was actually talking about, like, threatening. You'll hear it, Mark. Did you hear a quote about body bags? Did you hear that?
Yeah.
Yeah, so we'll play that for Scott Ritter and ask him if that's good diplomacy. It seems to me it's kind of the opposite of diplomacy. Right?
Well, I think a better word would be inverse. It is diplomacy. The question is it very good diplomacy? And then third, is it likely to do anything positive?
Now, have you heard much of this Sergei Lavrov, Liz Truss press conference that they had yesterday in Moscow?
I haven't. I was out of it most of yesterday. I was busy making money.
No, and look, and no normal person should say, oh, yes, of course. I never miss a Lavrov press conference. That's not normal. You follow me?
Okay, I'm glad I'm normal, man. I am.
Yes. But I played a lot of it yesterday, and I want to play a little bit more of it today. Let's get I want to get one of Lavrov's last answers, Saul, if we can go with that. Because I want you to listen. This is the reason I'm playing this is, first off, I don't want people to hear anybody's interpretation of Russia's position. Sergei Lavrov is the foreign minister for Russia, right? So when he speaks with some authority. He basically is the official position of Russia. And I want people to hear it direct from him so they can make up their own minds, because I'm seeing so much spin on this on the American side and the British side that and outright lies. I don't know how else to put it. But I think hearing from Lavrov himself is instructive and makes our listeners a little smarter. Does that make sense, Mark?
Always.
So let's hear a little bit of Sergei Lavrov yesterday at his press conference in Moscow with Liz Truss. And we may get a question in here as well. I'm not sure what we're hearing, but let's hear it, Saul. Tell me how long the clip is before you play it, too, approximately.
About 4.5 minutes.
Okay, good. So let's hear Sergei Lavrov, please.
Speaking about the idea that after military exercises, troops are supposed to return to bases, that's indeed so. So for the length of any military exercise, that's the sovereign right of any government. But while Russia is holding exercises at its own territory, and Russian troops will return to bases one way or another, while UK, the US and Canada have their troops in the Baltic states, in countries near the Black Sea. These troops and these armaments usually do not go home back to bases. I have talked about that to Ms. Truss today, but she has basically expressed her opinion that this is not Russia's business. And the de-escalation idea that you have reiterated once again is a factor that unites the entire West against Russia. And the logic that have been imposed on you by the political elites of the West, in this logic, you asked a question: is Russia ready to make a meaningful act, a gesture to de-escalate the situation? First of all, you have to prove to me that it was Russia that actually escalated the situation, or that Russia has been doing something that goes against or is not protected by Russia's own legitimate interests or its sovereignty. I leave it to the West to decide for themselves whether Russia has troops in Ukraine or have a weaponry in Ukraine. It's all back to the highly likely category. The Skripal case, the Navalny case, etc. No facts, no evidence. We remind you of that all the time. You just, they fall on deaf ears. You ignore all of our statements. We have, it seems like Russia has different set of rights in the international arena, not the same rights as the UK has, according to Foreign Secretary Truss. You mentioned exercises in Belarus, and Ms. Truss said that the most important thing is to prevent a war in Ukraine. That's why I'm here, she said. I think that the West is trying to make a tragedy out of all this situation, although it's, from outside it looks like a comedy. I think that in some time, the West will see that Russian exercises with Belarus will end, will be completed, and then troops will return to Russia. And then there will be a lot of hubbub that, well, actually the West was successful in making Russia de-escalate the situation, in forcing Russia's hand. But this will be hollow words, because Russia's troops always return to bases after any military exercises. Actually, I've read in one of the Canadian media outlets that the matter of Ukraine, there was this Canadian reporter who said that, Ukraine is a crutch that the Western politicians use to retain their standing, so to speak, their ratings. And I think when it comes to the security issue, I sincerely hope that we can all act as adults and not engage in propaganda to try and achieve some electoral outcomes.
So there you go. There's Sergei Lavrov. Now, Mark, and again, it's translated so it's not as forceful in presentation as I think his words were. But he was very clear to me, saying, look, you guys accuse us of stuff all the time in the West, Skripal poisoning, Litvinenko, these other things, Navalny. You never have any proof. You never listen to any evidence. And he points out that we have troops in Belarus doing military exercises. And he's saying they're going to go back to Russia. And he's predicting when that happens, the West will go, see, we batten them down. But anybody who just listened to what he said, he's saying they're there on exercises, as is their right, because they were invited in by Belarus to do joint military exercises. After, by the way, the government of Belarus, they were trying to topple it. The U.S. and Great Britain were trying to topple it. So I understand why Belarus might want some military in there and be doing exercises with Russia. So what did you think, hearing Sergei Skripal's, Sergei Lavrov's words there? I'm too confused by too many Sergeys there, Mark. What did you think?
Well, you know my view in all of this. I mean, I can't stand communism and I can't stand fascism. And the thing in Ukraine doesn't seem to be an American. I don't see any reason whatsoever why Americans are even involved in that issue. That should be a Eastern European issue, and they'll work it out themselves if the UN will let them.
Well, and I would say, in America's defense, the reason we're involved is because we created it. We made it up. So since we made it up, we need to stick by it. Because even the president of Ukraine, Zelensky, has said, we don't think Russia's about to invade. And that's completely ignored, including by Liz Truss, the foreign minister from the UK. And it seems to me Russia does have a history. I remember Khrushchev beating his shoe on the table saying, we will bury you. You didn't hear any of that kind of, you know, you're hearing a guy going, you're making these accusations against us. You can't prove a negative. You know, it's the old classic, don't think of a pink elephant scenario or whatever.
Right.
Don't think of an invasion. Once the U.S. and by the way, he mentioned what someone from Canada said. Canada is now talking to Great Britain. They're going to sanction Russia anyway. Now, what, as an economist, what are the effects of sanctions? Forget the diplomacy for a second, Mark. But they're talking about ending the Nord Stream 2 pipeline as one thing, which is something that Russia and Germany were going to do, which would have meant lower gas prices for Germany. But what effect do sanctions and ending things like Nord Stream, what do they have economically as a market disruption?
Well, sanctions hurt them, and the collateral damage is that it also hurts us. So if, you know, we can certainly place sanctions on Russia, it doesn't stop them from selling their oil. It does reduce the margin by which they make on their oil. So it is correct to say that Russia won't like the sanctions, but there's ways to get around them, and they have plenty of buyers of their oil. And as we do this, we're going to strengthen our own supply shock when it comes to oil and energy, which did not used to exist just a year ago. And now we've gone into this highly energy dependent state of being. And again, I think it's just it's utterly ridiculous how, from an economic perspective, this administration has consistently chosen the wrong choice. I mean, every single thing they've done, I think, has made inflation worse. It's made the likelihood of a pandemic recovered lower class dim. And it's I'm not bullish on how the administration's doing it.
Well, I've even noticed out here in South Dakota, I went out for lunch a couple times. Not much, but a couple times recently. And lunch entrees were $15 to $20 for a lunch entree. And that's notably higher than it was even a few months ago. Are you seeing that kind of thing where you are in Georgia at all, where noticeable price increases at places like the grocery store or restaurants, that kind of thing, Mark?
Yes, absolutely. Both in terms of drastic price increases and drastic size reduction. You know, I used to get this ice cream I like, this Butterfinger ice cream by the gallon. Now it's the half gallon, and it's the same price, just half the size. So, the fact that we have inflation is a real thing. And, you know, whether I'm on your show, this show, or Fault Lines, it's been brewing since the dawn of the Trump administration. And by today, it's the single worst issue we have right now. It's going to dramatically transform this country if we're not careful.
Well, and one of the reasons I ask you how conditions are where you are in Georgia, and I mentioned how they are in South Dakota, people out there may be listening in places like, Nebraska or California, New York, whatever, and going, no, I have no idea what they're talking about. Too bad for those poor suckers in Georgia or South Dakota. But I don't think that they are. And this is what I think is significant about the inflation. I think it's significant when you start feeling it every day and you start noticing it to the point where when you get the check, there's a little bit of what they call sticker shock, right? That's when it becomes a real political liability. It's one thing if you hear about inflation in a sort of abstract way, but it doesn't affect you. But what we're talking about is people getting affected, I believe, all over the country, Mark. Do you think that's the case?
Yes, absolutely. And the people who can't take it, the people who are affected by it every 5 minutes, are the so-called working poor. It's that lower rung of the people. They're not at home living on welfare. They're out working, and they're working at that lowest level. And that's the people that get the inflation tax. That's the people who are hit the hardest with the inflation tax. And it is a tax because it removes the amount of money that they have to spend on things, just like a tax does.
And we did have the stock market, last I heard, was down about 500 points today. And I can never tell what the hell's going on with the stock market, I'll be honest. Because
well, even worse than that, what makes the stock market data troubling to people like me, it isn't just that the market's down, it's that the derivatives markets, which determine it, are all over the map. They're exceptionally volatile right now.
Now, they're also saying that car manufacturing was messed up because of the ship shortages. Now, because of what's going on in Canada, particularly that bridge that goes between Detroit and Windsor, Ontario, is significant because they're saying up in Canada, where there is a fair bit of car manufacturing, that they're not able to get parts. So they're going to shut things down. So this truckers convoy, which their solution seems to be, I'm sure you saw what they did was in Ontario, they seized the charity money that had been raised for the truckers. You saw that, right?
Yes.
There was a whole bunch of money raised for the truckers, and the government said, no, you can't have it. They froze. So in other words,
fraud.
In Canada, they're putting sanctions on Canadians, right? And I'll tell you what I said, and tell me, is this bad economics? I don't think he's going to listen to me. But I said someone like Elon Musk, who could afford it, should basically front the truckers the money, get a marker that the money, when it gets unfrozen, goes to him. You follow me? Because it seems to me like he could afford that. And then he hires some smart lawyers to start suing Ontario's pants off. Because a guy like Musk is in a better position and is one plaintiff. Is there anything, I mean, again, I don't think he's under any obligation altruistically to do it. I just think it would really screw up their plans. Is there any, him basically fronting the money to the truckers, is that stupid economically, or would that be okay for Elon to do?
Well, from a macroeconomic view, I mean, it doesn't mean much. From an economic perspective, as far as just the microeconomics, I think what it does is it sets up that Elon has thrown in his hat with this sort of ideology, this anti-lockdown, anti-government, excessive police state involvement in our lives while ignoring borders, ignoring things that matter. I think so. Elon's clearly hooked up with a political crowd. To me, that's what's interesting.
Yes, and that's why I'm suggesting, like I say, if you're out there, Elon, just driving around Washington, D.C., and you hear this, that's my suggestion. Go do that. Because also, people who were kind of like Elon Musk would love Elon Musk after that. Does that make sense? A lot of people who are civilians, they'd go, That's awesome. And I do think a guy like Elon Musk could afford it. You know, he's a billionaire, and that's hard for people to conceive of. But you know what I'm saying.
It's hard for me to conceive of it.
Right, sure. And if it wasn't, I don't know why you're here with me. But we're glad you are. It's Frosty Friday here on the best damn radio show in the world. Coming up, Scott Ritter's joining us, and we're going to play a frightening quote from Wendy Sherman talking about body bags. Coming up right after this on The Backstory.
Want to talk? Get in touch with us at radio@sputniknews.com.
So, Sean, what do you want to talk about today?
Well, Bob, that's easy. I want to talk about the need to stop the development of self-driving cars.
Again, Sean, you're driving me nuts. I think the self-driving car thing's already out of the gate.
No. It's never too late. See, now the leading experts in the field, I mean, just pick one, whichever one, leading experts have repeatedly warned us about the dangers of artificial intelligence. Look, I'm telling you, man, we have to stop the robots by any means necessary.
I see what you did there.
Yep.
Tune into our show By Any Means Necessary daily from 2 to 4 p.m. Eastern Time on Radio Sputnik. And don't forget to call in at 3:20 p.m. to our studio number 202-521-1320.
And if you miss us live, check us out on SputnikNews.com, Spreaker, iTunes, iHeartRadio, Spotify, or wherever you listen to podcasts to stay up to date on the latest political, social, and economic movements shaping the world around us.
Feeling kind of blue, but maybe also kind of red, and kind of purple, and kind of alone? You've got a friend on Radio Sputnik. Tune into Political Misfits from 12 to 2 Eastern Time, Monday through Friday, for news, politics, and culture without the two-party bias. Catch us daily on 105.5 in Washington, D.C., or 102.9 or 104.7 in Kansas City. Or find us on Twitter, Facebook, YouTube, Spotify, or wherever you get your news.
Are you bored? Are you lonely? Do you need a hug? Well, we can't give you that, but we can keep you up to date on Radio Sputnik.
We are back on a Frosty Friday. I remember the fourth E with economist, educator, entrepreneur, and Eagle Scout. See, that's the fourth E. And prog rock drummer. You know what I should do? I should just say an electronic drummer, but you also play acoustic. You play everything. But that way I could get, E drummer, something like that. Mark Frost is with us. Hey, Mark.
What you doing?
A show, 105.5 FM, AM 1390. Joining us right now is a great friend of the show. It is always literally an honor to have Scott Ritter, former U.S. Marine, also UN weapons inspector, legend. Hey, Scott, how you doing?
I'm doing good, thanks.
I knew you'd get a kick out of that, but it is true, Scott. You know you're fairly well known, right? You're aware of that, correct?
Well, yeah, but still, legend. If this is this is the standard that legends are born from, we're in trouble.
and let me say this too, because I haven't even talked about what I think is the number one story, which is this new report that came out about the CIA that Ron Wyden declassified and is pushing. And I want to talk to you about that. But I want you to think about what you did, Scott. Literally, I think for a lot of people, you were the first crack in the armor for realizing that the government lies to them, lies their way into war. I think people, I know for me, I was one of those people before I did this for a living and I was just a civilian who would watch the news. I was watching you, and it was a revelation. So, do you have an awareness? I know it's a weird question because I know you're just you, and so you know when you burp or whatever, but right, and you're a Jim Croce fan, etc. You're just a human being, but are you aware of the role that you played, I think, in waking up a lot of people to stuff that they weren't aware of before?
It was a conscious decision on my part because it was a career-ending decision to take on the government. I mean, I was warned by you mentioned the CIA, but when I was preparing my letter of resignation to the United Nations, I was brought into the UN mission, the U.S. mission to the United Nations, up to the 7th floor, I think it was, where the CIA has their office, and I was put on the phone to the National Security Council, and they begged me to stay and all this stuff. And I said, either you change your policy or I have to go. They said, well, we can't change our policy. I said, I'm going. So we hung up the phone. And the CIA guy who liked me, we got along well. He said, you do know that the FBI is going to, and he used, some crude terms. You're screwed. It's over. The U.S. government has turned on you. I said, yeah, it's a price I have to pay because, the truth needs to be told. So I was very aware. I was surprised how difficult it was to get the mainstream media to take me seriously. I mean, they ended up, they couldn't be dismissive because of the resume I brought to the table. But, man, I got smeared left, right, and center because of, called crazy, called, Saddam's bag man. I've been bought out by Saddam, for simply telling the truth. So, yeah, no, I'm very cognizant of it. But to be honest, if I reflect on it too hard, I just get angry and my ulcers come back and things of that nature. So it is what.
Well, I'm not trying to do that, Scott. You know that, right? So.
I know.
Yeah. I didn't come into this thinking, how can I give Scott Ritter ulcers? That was not my thinking. But Mark Frost on Frosty Friday, let me ask you, were you one of those people like me who used to watch Scott Ritter on the TV set and watch kind of in wonder that the whole, weapons of mass, the tubes and everything was a complete lie? Or were you one of those people, Mark?
Yeah, I was skeptical to begin with just because that's just my nature. When the world starts preaching bipartisanship and they're doing it just because everybody is in a warm and happy, agreeable place at the moment, that always makes me kind of nervous anyway. And then when there's a lot of effort promoting a particular type of expert over some other sort of expert, then you got to start diving in and saying, okay, who's the kook that says this? And then you read a little bit, or maybe you see something on YouTube, or you find information, and then you realize, no, this person is a reasonable human being. They're not the tinfoil hat sort of person. And so you start reading them and listening to them. So that's how I became aware of all that work over there. And it helped me gain a vision of what's really going on over there, as opposed to what are people saying is going on. And I think it's relevant to today. So
I agree. So, and yeah. I'll tell you, it's also relevant to the Joe Rogan. Forgive me, Mark, but it's relevant to the Rogan thing. I was thinking about this today. One of the, conspiracy theorist nuts is literally the guy who helped invent mRNA. And when the guy who helps invent it says, I don't think this is safe, I'm not saying he's right automatically. What I'm saying is he's not a lone nut. Does that make sense, right, Mark?
Totally, and there's a difference, in that. I chose to be vaccinated. And people ask me all the time, well, why do you get so fired up over or people trying to force the unvaccinated to be vaccinated. And I go into the civil liberties context, because to me that's a dangerous road to tread on. And
right.
so I chose
Scott,
to get vaccinated, but just because others didn't doesn't mean that I don't like them.
Right, or think they should be forced to, obviously.
Right, exactly.
Now, Scott, I said, because I've not talked about it yet, this story that came out, and I got to say, as somebody who's on the right, it's disgusting to me that not a single Republican has said a damn thing about this. A Republican who's on the Intelligence Committee. I went through the websites of all the people on the Intelligence Committee. The guy who's pushing this is Ron Wyden, a Democrat from Oregon. And I think the grassroots base of the Republicans, they've done polls and they've shown this. Grassroots Democrats like the CIA more than grassroots Republicans, like and trust them more. We saw this polling. But yet it's a Democrat, Ron Wyden from Oregon, who's the one who's pushing this. How big a revelation was it? I know you weren't shocked into stunned disbelief or anything, Scott, but how big a story is this? This declassified report shows the CIA's been spying, keeping files on Americans for a while and working with the FBI directly. Scott?
This is true. If this is true, and, I have to caveat it because I haven't seen the documents. I can't evaluate it. It's, we know when Edward Snowden came out and spoke about the NSA's, widespread collection, vacuuming up all the data in the world. That has been deemed to be a violation of the, of our constitutional rights, massive violation. And with that, it was just a matter of collecting it and holding it. And in order for people to access it, they had to go through a process to gain access to it. So the abuse was the collection, not necessarily the use. Here, first of all, understand this: the CIA. It's not just that they shouldn't be collecting data on American citizens; they're prohibited by law from doing it. So any CIA officer who was engaged in activity that resulted in the collection of data that's prohibited by law, not only should be fired, lose their pension, should be prosecuted and put in jail. I mean, that's how serious this is. Otherwise, what we have is a rogue agency that becomes politicized. You're operating outside the framework of law. There's no checks and balances, which means them to determine who you're going to violate and who you're not. And this points out to something else. The CIA has been fundamentally broken for a long time. They don't even produce good intelligence anymore because they've become so politicized. They've become, at the senior levels, married to the current administration. Their job isn't to tell the administration the truth, to tell the administration what they want to hear. Any junior analyst that seeks to put forward a product that contradicts the perception that's being managed is that information is suppressed by middle management who's looking to get the higher rung. So their analysis is horrible. If they're collecting intelligence, they don't know how to collect intelligence on the bad guys. We know that because they're not getting anything. They have no ability to penetrate Iran. They can't penetrate Russia. They can't penetrate China. Worse, every time they try, they get rolled up. I mean, it's just one disaster after the other. And now if we're finding out that they're actually collecting data on American citizens knowingly and using this with the FBI, frankly speaking, that's two organizations that America would just be better off without.
Now, that's a hell of a quote right there, Scott. Now, let me just ask you this, because you're a pro. You not only know military stuff very well and weapons and everything, but you also know the way D.C. works. And I noticed something last night in researching this, because I did read the papers, and it's declassified documents. So it's not like an expose in a newspaper that's guessing. it's documents that are declassified now that clearly show this is what was going on. And but let me ask you something that I noticed. I was looking at who's on the Senate Intel Committee, and I noticed that both senators from the great state of Maine, and when I say great, I mean fairly sparsely populated. Anyone who's ever been up to Maine, and I used to teach there sometimes, Maine is a very empty state. It's devoid of human beings. There's some lobsters, but there's not a lot of people up in Maine. It's a big state, especially, you know, top to bottom. It's very big, but not South Dakota big, but pretty damn big. But I noticed that both senators, Susan Collins and the Democrat named Angus, I forget his full name, are on Senate Intel. Does that mean a damn thing? Does that mean that Maine has, you know, any special pull with the Intel Committee? Does that mean anything at all, Scott, or is it just an interesting coincidence?
No, it's an interesting coincidence. There's nothing special about Maine. It's not like New Mexico and nuclear policy. I mean, you know, New Mexico's got Sandia National Labs. It's got Los Alamos. Lawrence Livermore does work there. So New Mexico, you know, whoever the senator is deeply vested in, you know, this nuclear infrastructure because that brings billions of dollars to his state, jobs, prestige, et cetera. Maine, there's no prestige intelligence collection activity taking place in Maine. They used to have a military base that was of some strategic importance, Bangor. But other than that, no, there's nothing there. It's just a matter of a senator throwing their hat in the ring and getting appointed. You know, Susan Collins has been around forever. You know, and so it's you know, once you get on a prestige committee, you're on it forever, unless you make the decision to get off. So, and I actually think that that's probably a good thing. I mean, I haven't investigated either of their records, but to have a senator who's not married to, for instance, not a senator from West Virginia or Virginia, you know, or New York or Maryland, you know, where there is significant intelligence activity, you know, then your senators would tend to be in the pocket of the intelligence community. But, you know, to be from Maine, literally there's nothing that the intelligence community brings Maine. So, you know, I would hope that Susan Collins could approach the issue with as clear a head as possible.
Well, and it seems that the senator from New Mexico's the guy who, with Wyden, is putting it out. And I want to say this. If there's going to be any kind of church committee, and there should be, in my opinion, for the intelligence community, it's going to come from Wyden, because he seems very consistent as a critic on this, and he's about the only one, isn't he, Scott?
No, Wyden's been a very consistent critic of the intelligence community, and in particular of the abuses that take place in terms of you know, American civil liberties. So, you know, I'm not a big fan of Wyden outside of this, but when it comes to his defense of civil liberties in the face of, you know, abuses by the intelligence community, he's been rock solid.
Yeah, no, that's my take too. Because again, you know, I'm not a huge fan of him outside of this, but on this, I wish there were a Republican who was as good as him. I pray, and there's just not. Now, let me ask you this, and Saul, let's get that clip ready. This is Wendy Sherman, and we're in the middle of talks with Russia, and I want you to hear this statement from her. You probably have heard it already, but I want to make sure everyone hears this. Here's Wendy Sherman from the State Department talking about how she'd deal with Russia. Let's play that, Saul.
If Vladimir Putin takes that action, the consequences will not just be for the Ukrainian people, which will be terrible, but for the world community at large, because Vladimir Putin will say that any autocrat can take action that undermines international principles that Russia has signed up to sovereignty, to territorial integrity, that countries get to choose their own political alliances and their own foreign policy. And added to that, not only will there be dire consequences to the economy of Russia by what we will do, not just the United States, but this extraordinary alliance that exists with all of Europe and the United States and countries around the world. Not only will that create consequences, but Vladimir Putin should understand that body bags will come back to Moscow as well, that the citizens of Russia will suffer because their economy will be completely devastated. So this is a very stark choice for him.
Now, Scott, again, I'm not a diplomat. I've never been in the diplomatic corps, but it seems to me that once you're using a phrase body bags, that seems like pretty aggressive talk. Am I wrong?
No, you're 100% correct. And look, let's just be frank here. Wendy Sherman is as light a lightweight as you can get. You know, she had her moment in the sun with the Iran nuclear deal, but you know, she didn't take us over the finish line. John Kerry did. She is shallow in terms of her knowledge of the things she's supposed to be an expert in, which is arms control. On Russia, she's just 100% ignorant. So understand that when Wendy Sherman is speaking there, it's not because Wendy Sherman is informed about what's going on, that she has, she's absorbed knowledge and she's digested it and she's, bringing it out in a manner which reflects, her own thinking on it. She's repeating buzz phrases because, believe me, Wendy Sherman wouldn't know a body bag if it hit her in her face. All right? She has zero military experience, zero concept of what combat really is. And so for someone of her ilk to speak of body bags, what she is she's repeating buzz phrases that others have said. It's basically her entire speech, because I've heard all these words before from others. Her entire speech is basically a cut and paste job where somebody has, agreed upon language from other presentations and put it together, and she memorized it. So she's just regurgitating it. But this is not a woman who knows what she's talking about. And remember this, as she speaks, she's going up against, people like Sergei Lavrov. And if you want to talk about the heavyweight of heavyweights in the International Diplomatic Corps, he is the heaviest weight there is. There's no one better than him today. The man is knowledgeable. When he speaks, it's in a very measured tone. Every word is careful. Every word is accurate factually. Every word is tied to not just superficial policy, but in-depth policy. He's sharp. Wendy Sherman's not. I mean, and yet she is, one of the primary faces that the Biden administration is putting out there, together with another lightweight, Anthony Blinken, and then even another lightweight, Jake Sullivan. To have Jake Sullivan briefing the world as he was today in a panic about, imminent Russian invasion, Sullivan has no gravitas. He has no depth. And nobody in the Biden administration does, with the exception of perhaps William Burns, the CIA director, who, fortunately for America, was a career diplomat, not a career intelligence, bureaucrat. So, he was brought into the CIA not because he's an expert in espionage, but because he's an expert in back-channel diplomacy. And if we're going to get out of this Ukrainian mess, it isn't going to be because of Wendy Sherman, Tony Blinken, or Jake Sullivan. It's going to be because William Burns, a man who can sit at the same table with Lavrov and not walk away looking like a fool. William Burns is working the issue behind the scenes.
There we go. Okay, Mark Frost, any questions for Scott Ritter?
He covered everything perfectly. My problem with Scott is I never disagree with him.
Well, trust me, if we had a beer, I'm sure we could find a couple things.
Oh, now that's a different story. Yeah, those are the more honest ones.
Yeah.
Yeah. No. Now, so did you see the Lavrov? We played close to an hour of audio between yesterday and today of the Lavrov Trust press conference. You must have seen that, right, Scott? That was an embarrassment for the. Go ahead.
No, I watched the whole thing. First of all, again, we gotta set it up properly. Truss is, if I called Wendy Sherman a lightweight, Truss is, even a lighter feather. She's a politician. Came into office in I think 2010, and she's held a variety of jobs in various governments dealing with the Treasury, with women's rights, things of that nature. Nothing with foreign policy, nothing with international relations, nothing with Russia. So she got this job in 2021. She hasn't been in it a year, and now she's thrown into the biggest crisis she's ever going to experience in her lifetime. She's totally out of her depth. Sitting next to her, however, was the British ambassador, another woman who knows Russia inside and out, very intelligent, very articulate, married to a Russian, by the way. And she helped guide Truss, but a lot of people are saying that Lavrov set her up. He didn't. She set herself up by, criticizing Russian troop movements. And Lavrov simply was making the point, does Russia not have sovereignty over Rostov and Voronezh, where there are two major troop concentrations? The implication is, doesn't Russia have the right to move troops on its own soil? She misunderstood and thought he was talking about sovereignty of Lugansk and Donetsk. And so she said, no, the UK is, in defense of the sovereignty of others, and Russia will never be able to infringe, da-da-da-da. So she looked like a fool. The UK ambassador is going apoplectic over there. She's trying to no, what he was saying was X, Y, and Z. And they corrected it. So there's a huge gaffe, and it is indicative, of the quality of diplomat that the United States and its allies are bringing to bear on this. These are not heavyweights. These are lightweights, and yet we're in a heavyweight situation. This is like a high school super featherweight boxer who has never done anything but hit a heavy bag, getting in the ring with Muhammad Ali in his prime. I mean, it's just not even going to be a contest. We need to bring better talent to the front, and we're not, because this is all about domestic politics. This is about how it plays here at home, not how it actually plays with Russia, because, frankly, our politicians don't care how it plays with Russia, because we're not dealing with reality. We're dealing with perception and how we can shape perception.
Now, listening yesterday, I got the distinct impression from every statement I've heard from Russia, including from Lavrov, including from Putin, who's been meeting with world leaders. So if Putin's lying that he's not planning on invading Ukraine, he's lying to people like Macron, and they'll never believe him again. So just on the basis of, I'm not saying he's not capable of lying, but there would be significant consequences if he flat out just said, no, I'm absolutely not going to invade. Then he did the next day, right? That would be bad for Russia's credibility with world leaders. Correct, Scott?
You're 100% correct. When I was in the United Nations, one of my colleagues was a very senior Russian diplomat, former Soviet diplomat. And he said, you don't always have to tell the truth, but you can never lie. And he also said something else. He said, words matter. When you open your mouth and you speak a word, that word has weight. It has significance. It has meaning. And so you have to be very careful with the words you use. And Putin is extremely careful with the words he uses. Russia will not initiate military action against Ukraine. I'm convinced of it because of the points you just made. Vladimir Putin's prestige, integrity is on the line. Russia's prestige and integrity is on the line. However, Russia will respond violently in the case of a major provocation. Russia's not going to allow some nickel dime, Nazi supporting thug to get it involved in a major conflict in Ukraine. So, if there's a minor thing, where somebody mortars something or somebody fires a shell, et cetera, Russia's not taking the bait. But if the Ukrainian government orders a major military offensive against the Donbass, it's all she wrote. It's over.
Well, and we got to go. We're out of time. Scott Ritter, thanks so much. I'll talk a little bit more about that when we come back on a Frosty Friday with the great Mark Frost joining us co-host today on The Backstory.
listening to Radio Sputnik. Telling the untold.
And we are back on a Friday. I'm Lee Stranahan, investigative journalist. This is a show that brings you the truth behind the headlines. It's the backstory. I want to thank Scott Ritter. Always a I really do mean it, an honor to have Scott Ritter on. He's very knowledgeable, and he tells it like it is. And he's got so much wide swath of experience, from dealing with diplomats to inspecting weapons. Have you ever inspected a weapon, Mark? Be honest.
Actually, I have. Remember, I'm a Marine too.
Right. So you've not just inspected them. I assume you fired one or two.
Oh, of course. I have 27 weapons in my house as I speak.
There we go. And I assume that if trouble starts, you're not just going to be inspecting them. You're ready to, throw down. But great.
Well, I will inspect them first. Yes, I always inspect them before I use them.
And I assume you keep them clean and all that stuff that I hear you're supposed to do with weapons?
Yes, I'm very responsible. They're kept clean, checked, always in good working order, and always within range of my fingertips.
Do you have good trigger discipline?
I do. I'm very, very good with weapons. I had my first weapon, that was mine, when I was age 12.
Wow. What was it?
That was pre-Columbine. It was a little .22 short rifle. And, of course, that would never happen today, but that was pre-Columbine. So
now I'm just asking, Mark, do you by any chance have a little Derringer you can put in your boot?
I actually do. Yes, I actually do have one. It's actually
okay.
Yes. It's actually part of a belt buckle.
Here's why I'm not surprised, because I know how much you like cymbals and drums. So I assume there's something about you that likes the mechanics of certain things, right? Aside from the loud sound they make, right?
Oh, yes, yes. I'm all about the theory of drum heads, for instance.
Yes. Now, speaking of drummers, joining us this hour, in the last half hour of the week, is the great Kim Iverson, jazz drummer who plays match grip, not match grip, traditional grip, forgive me. So sacrilege for a second there. But
Nobody plays
traditional
jazz
grip
with matched grip, dude.
Now, why? Explain that to the non-drummers out there. Let me just say the backstory. Then Mark will explain the difference between traditional and match grip. Traditional is where the match grip is every rock drummer pretty much plays match grip. That's where you just pick up the sticks and hold them in your hands, basically, right?
Yeah.
And match grip is where the snare drum hand, your left hand usually, if you're a normal right-handed person, where your left hand, you hold it so it's sort of like a chopstick almost. Is that wrong to say, Mark?
Yeah, that's sort of correct. I mean, basically, match grip is when you hold them the same in each hand, kind of like clubs, the way you'd hold a club. That's matched grip. On the kit, on the left hand for right-handed drummers, you'll hold the drumstick in between your second and your third finger, and you use your wrist to get your snare bounce. You use your wrist to get your all your snare work, because there's so much snare work in jazz. And then even the way you do fills changes, because you've changed your body and how you hit the drums and how you even want to arrange the drums in, so to speak. So what that does is it allows you to be more precise in a small space. So you can make a kit, not just a drum set, but a drum kit, where you're kind of, you're right in that trap, and you're right above that snare drum. And so that's kind of jazz drumming at a high level. Is you want control, you want to be able to play forceful and meaningful, yet not super loud too.
Well, and I was mentioning Steve Smith from band Journey. If anyone goes to YouTube and looks for Journey Separate Ways, that's a later Journey song, mid-late 80s. But if
Why
you
did
watch
you
the
even
drummers,
bring later Journey songs up?
Because I like that song. And Steve Smith, he plays these triplet fills going into the chorus. I'll tell you, I even played, you know what I do? I'll reveal a secret. If anyone follows me on Twitter, I play, because I grew up listening to, rock radio, specifically because I grew up in Massachusetts, Rock 102, which still plays the same albums that they had when I was growing up. A lot of Foghat and ZZ Top, that kind of thing. Still, to this day, Mark. But I play blocks of rock on Twitter. I almost never play one song. I'll play 3 songs, and often they're thematically intertwined in some way. For instance, I'll tell you what song I played yesterday. I was thinking about what's going on in Canada, and I played it was 2 days ago. I played Bastille Day from Rush. But have you ever seen the video of them playing at this theater in New Jersey in 1976 when they opened with Bastille Day?
I think I have.
It's in black and white. It's a crappy video, but it's a fantastic performance. And, it was Neil before his drum set was really big. It was 76. So it was when it was starting to get big. But you know what I'm saying? It was slightly smaller. And, boy, he just kicked butt on that. And they all did. And Bastille Day was a powerful song to open. But I played it thematically because we talked about it. Bastille Day, of course, if I were Justin Trudeau, if he starts hearing Bastille Day being played by the crowd outside, he should get under a desk. Would you agree with me, Mark? That's the sign something's about to go down.
All the Canadian Rush fans are upset. It's like the Trees when that came out.
Yes. And if he looks out and he sees people with hatchets, axe, and saw, something's going on. There's some
re-levelings going on.
There we go. The Little Trees reference for anybody out there. By the way, if people play drums or know Rush, the conversations Mark and I have are deeply layered with meaning, that we're not just throwing out random words. If I say hatchet, axe, and saw, Mark knows exactly what I'm talking about, and that I'm quoting the lyrics accurately. Right, Mark?
Yes, because it really does usually begin with Ayn Rand.
Indeed. And this is dedicated to the genius of Ayn Rand, and Mark knows that reference as well. Right?
We have assumed control.
There we go. Yes, exactly right. Exactly right. And I'm not even going to say the name of the year. People can figure it out. Or they can.
And it also matters, speaking of reference, it also matters what frame of reference you're in when you listen to this sort of music. Only in some states are you allowed to be in that state.
Oh, are you suggesting people go on a passage to Bangkok before they see what I did there?
Yes, exactly.
See, because here's the thing. On the album 2112, which, by the way, has the only love song, really, you could argue that some of the songs from later, you could argue that maybe, Time Stands Still in a way is a love song. But 2112 has Rush's only love ballad, Tears, right? There's no other song like that in Rush's songbook, is there?
Right.
It's a weird song for Rush, and there's not, as befits a love ballad, which it is, it does not have heavy pounding drums. But that album, which is very literate and dedicated to Jesus and Ayn Rand, also has Passage to Bangkok, which, tell me if I'm misinterpreting this, Mark, that song is about traveling around the world getting high, right? That's what it's about.
Pretty much, yes. Or better said, it's the perception of traveling around the world getting high.
Yes, but I think it is about traveling around the world getting high, because he's talking about the good weed he's getting in different parts, Colombia or wherever he is. He apparently could get the good weed. But 202-521-1320, Tarif, thanks for holding. And then Dan in Montana, we'll get to you. That's who that is right after that. Right, Saul?
Yep, Dan in Montana.
Dan in Montana, we'll get to you right after Tarif. Tarif, thanks for holding. What's on your mind?
I have two comments. First, I'd like to say free Julian Assange, free Dunlinger, and hashtag no more. My first comment is dealing with truck convoy. That's going to begin in sometime this month. Once it begins, hopefully by them blocking up traffic or slowing down trade, shelves might be going half empty, even more so. And we got hyperinflation around here as well. Once that start happening, hopefully I'm speculating that make Biden administration pay attention more to at home instead of overseas. Maybe that take some tensions off of Russia dealing with the sanctions or war, because once that trucker convoy get underway here, then things might start changing for the best. Just hope and pray for that, or maybe not. My second comment is dealing with Julian Assange and his legal team and his wife. They need to reach out to the truckers, because the truckers have the headline, and see what they can do to help them. They can help them with their cryptocurrency that they gather over the week by donating to the truckers. In return, the truckers can turn around and help Julian Assange by putting banners on the side of the trucks saying, free Julian Assange, freedom of speech, and, Freedom Trucker Convoy 2022. They can help out both each other. That'd be a good thing for they both can do to help out.
No, I agree with that. I think the problem is any money raised for the truckers right now, the province of Ontario, by seizing the money, they've frozen the money that was meant for the truckers. And Doug Ford, not a fan of that last name, but Doug Ford, who's the premier of Ontario, they've made it very clear they are going to try to starve out the truckers. Right. Would you agree with that, Mark? It seems like they're going to do anything they can to get rid of them, to crush them, right?
Well, yeah, because the truckers they've basically committed the unpardonable sin, right? From a politician's perspective. All those truckers and that whole movement has embarrassed not just the politicians, but even the mainstream media and how they get supported. And big tech, everybody has egg on their face because of this, and people are angry.
Yes, and I think a lot of the stuff is converging. And I think you're right about that, Tarif. And I do think there's crossover. And I think this CIA thing we talked about with Scott Ritter is a huge story, and the impact is not yet hit. But that could turn into a gigantic, with everything else that's going on, with COVID-19, with them shutting down the trucker thing. And I'll tell you who I think, and I hope it affects, is Mike Pompeo. Mike Pompeo, and actually, I didn't think every year, towards the end of the month, they hold CPAC, the big conservative political action conference. It used to be in Virginia. Before that, it was in D.C. And last year it was in Florida. And every year, Mark, do you ever have events that you swear you're not going to go this year, but then you end up going every year? Do you have anything like that in your life?
Yeah, Sturgis.
Well, no, that makes sense to me because you mentioned you ride. And Sturgis is one of, I can see where it's one of those things. So I'm like that with CPAC. Every year I think I'm not going to go. And then something happens and I end up going. And by the way, if my boss is listening, I'm not going to hit you up for it either. I may have a job that would bring me to CPAC. Does that make sense? Like doing some production work, shooting some video for somebody.
Yeah,
and they've
but
already
that's
got
just
the
rationalization. You're addicted. You're addicted to that stuff, man.
I'd like to think I'm not. Although there are some people. Well, I'm sure you're like this with Sturgis. I'm sure you have friends that you only see at Sturgis, right?
Yes.
And you know what I'm talking about. But there are people
and that's
you
the only
genuinely
time I see them. The only time I even hear from them, once a year.
Right. It's like that for me at CPAC. There are some people who I only see them at CPAC, but I like them. It's not that I don't like them. Just we're busy, and we run into each other at CPAC. And I know how to work the parties now. I know where the good food is for free.
Oh, you do?
And that's fun. Oh, sure, yeah. I'll tell you, James O'Keefe, great journalist, also knows how to throw a party and has very good food. Whoever's in charge of doing his parties they're spending the good money. And they have very good food at James O'Keefe's parties. So, and there's some people I like. I like James, and I like a lot of people who work for him as well. But there we go. So I may end up, gosh darn it, I may end up in Orlando, Florida in a couple of weeks. We'll find out. But the reason I mentioned that, I forget why I mentioned that even. Oh, yeah. Mike Pompeo is going to be speaking at CPAC.
We were talking about Rush, and we were talking about their songs, yes.
And Mike Pompeo needs to be held accountable. And I'm hoping, and by held accountable, I mean, if I see Pompeo, and I will, and I have a camera with me, and I have a clear way to do it, I'll go up to Pompeo and hold the camera up and ask him some questions and watch him sputter and stutter out responses about why he was going to murder Julian Assange and about why, as the head of the CIA, he let Americans be spied on. Scott Ritter talked about people from the CIA need to be prosecuted. Mike Pompeo, in my opinion, is one of those people. But let's move from Sturgis talk. Let's go slightly west to Dan from Montana. Hey, Dan, how far are you from Sturgis? You're near West River, South Dakota. Not that far, are you?
Montana's a big state, so I'm a long ways away from there. But I can say that I'm close enough that I've been there twice accidentally. So I've just been in South Dakota during Sturgis, not planning to go to Sturgis, but then just ended up, veering to go there anyway.
And you're right, of course. Montana is, you hear that called big sky country. And I didn't get it till the first time I was there. But that's a very apt term, don't you think, Dan? The sky is big, isn't it? It sounds weird because it's just the sky. But it is big, right?
That derives, some people say, from a book that, of all things, uses the N-word extensively for some reason. But the big sky, I've always thought, is because the sky is so clear, the air is so clear that you can see the mountains 100 miles away. There are huge skies in Kansas and Iowa and in the Midwest, but you don't have any markers in the distance to tell how far something is away. But in Montana, you can land in Great Falls, where the nuclear arsenal at Mastrom Air Force Base is, and you can see the mountains where I live, which are 80 miles in the distance. And that's the closest city to us, and you can still sort of see us from that far away.
Well, thanks for the travel log, because I always like doing that. But, Dan, that's not what you're called about. So go ahead. What's on your mind today, sir?
I just had a couple of quick comments, and both have to do with this idea of guilt by association. The first one, I'm not trying to associate anything, but I think that the state of Maine does have a connection to the defense industry because of the former Secretary of Defense, William Cohen. And Susan Collins, the current senator, worked for Bill Collins for 12 years, not a short amount of time. And now Cohen represents the same consulting group that General Mattis went to, that a former, I'm not even as familiar with his work, but a former Secretary General of the of NATO, as recently as 2003, also consults for this group. So if there's anything to association, even if it doesn't make them guilty of conspiracy, I think that Susan Collins definitely was familiar with the culture of defense contracting and lobbying, regardless of whether Maine gets anything from it. Bill Cohen definitely got something from it, and I think that Collins does as well. And I was hoping...
Well, and if I'm going to get super conspiratorial, that's a great point, Dan. The Bushes like to vacation up in the islands there in Maine, and they like to go boating and stuff like that. So the Bush clan loves Maine. They're always going up there. I forget where I believe it's Kennebunkport, but I could be incorrect about that.
Yep.
But the Bushes, I know, because I've talked to Billy Bush about it when I used to work at Access Hollywood, and he would go up to the Bush compound, and I don't know why they have a compound there. But you know what? The reason I brought that up is there are some states. I had a girlfriend who lived in Arkansas for a while, and I knew a couple of people who knew, and I didn't know the scary stuff about Arkansas, like there's stuff in the mountains that like hidden forts or something, stuff like that. And I didn't know about all the mob, that the mob would go to Hot Springs, for instance. And I didn't know that. So there's stuff about different states that sometimes I don't know. And what Scott was mentioning about Sandia, I used to live in Albuquerque, so I know a little something about that. And I had a friend who worked at Sandia. But a lot of people don't know about Sandia. And I happen to have also lived in Pasadena. So I used to, you'll like this, Mark, I used to get high by JPL because it's a good place to overlook and smoke weed. And so I know about JPL only because I lived in Pasadena. So thanks for filling us in on that. That's an interesting point about Maine, because I just, all I know is that it's a not populous state where both of the senators are on the Senate Intel Committee. And that's a little odd to me. I don't know mathematically. Right. And the Bush clan, shall we say. Right? Because, you know, there's a bunch of them.
Yeah,
but anyway.
He was the director.
Yes, he was important, although his grandfather, and then people, sometimes, I've looked into this, and I don't know it by heart, but like when you hear him, George Herbert Walker Bush, the Walkers are also very interesting. That whole family tree is sort of interesting in a conspiratorial way. But anyway, Dan, did you have another thing you want to say?
A lot about conspiracies of these sort of oligarchy and influential firms. And that's going around a lot right now with this trucker convoy, where people are saying, just like they did with the Tea Party, well, you don't have to care about anything they're saying because they're funded by extremely wealthy and influential conservatives. The same thing gets said about Black Lives Matter and some others. And they're almost always true, but for some reason that allows the other side to completely dismiss the whole movement, all the people who have nothing to do with that fundraising. And I was just hoping you guys could maybe talk about this idea of astroturfing protests and why that shouldn't dismiss the whole thing.
Well, I have a slightly different opinion. I think you shouldn't dismiss the money behind these movements in a lot of cases. In other words, let's take, if I talk about Black Lives Matter, for instance, I think what they do is they, like, so for instance, I'll give an example using foreign policy. See if this makes sense, Mark. And again, I don't know if this is an economic term, but there always is, and you always know it. But it seems to me like the best way to stir up trouble between people is to name people anywhere in the world, is to find a natural, long-standing dispute. So, for instance, if I was trying to do a color revolution in Ireland, right, the Catholic versus Protestant issue has been going on for a long time, right? So I would take that and I wouldn't try to start a whole new conflict about, do they like you too or not for whatever. I wouldn't try to start a new one. I would take a long-standing one. In the United States, one of the long-standing conflicts is the legacy of slavery that we have. We had a whole civil war over it. So I think what they did was they figured out in Ukraine, they took the long-standing disputes between Eastern and Western Ukraine and between Ukraine and Russia. They're very long-standing, centuries old. And what they do is they use those as the point of entry. So there are people who are genuinely upset about those issues, but then they sort of get poked. And the money is used rather than to solve those conflicts and go, you know what? We fought a civil war over things, and black people have improved, and there's really not, and I'll say this, I don't think there's a country on earth where black people have done better than the United States, economically and stuff like that, including countries in Africa. And where we've had Barack Obama as president, sports and entertainment, and barbecue. So, but what I think they do, people with money, is figure out ways to exacerbate long-standing conflicts. Mark, does that make any sense at all?
Yeah, it does. I mean, it seems to me that just from a game theory perspective, what the players playing right now are doing is they're doing exactly what you said. They're not injecting new variables into the equation. They're simply massaging the ones that are there that are sensitive, and that creates sort of a echo chamber, and they get actually more bang for their buck doing that than they would if they were launching a full-scale information assault, so to speak. I mean, using our own virtues against us.
Well, and Mark, let me ask you something based on your expertise. You've talked about how you did business in Indonesia. You know quite a bit about it. I'd forgotten until recently. I knew it, but it was out of the front lobes of my brain, about Barack Obama and his mother's ties to Indonesia. What was the conflict in Indonesia? And is that still an existing conflict? Are people still bitter about that?
I wouldn't say that they're still bitter about that. The interesting thing about Indonesia is everybody gets over everything because it's always in their rational self-interest to settle. So if you just wanted to know what's the culture of Indonesia, everybody settles everything. Because the cost of that Western competitiveness is prohibitively high for them, I think they would say.
Well, specifically, Barack Obama's mother, Stanley, not a misprint, that was her name. Stanley was in USAID, which is largely considered a CIA front. But did you have any dealings with, like, USAID or any of the NGOs or civil society groups in your dealings with Indonesia, Mark?
No, not really, because I went there to live in a house with a family of 8 children, and all they had was a dirt floor and a carpet on top of it. And then when that was over, I hitchhiked through the country for about 2 months. And so I tried to stay away from the agencies and tried to meet as many real indigenous people as I possibly could. And I think that helped me understand the country better than maybe some do.
And you talked about how eating everything everyone gave you helped you in business as well. So there's a good lesson for everybody out there. Eat everything everyone gives you if you want to do business with them. Right, Mark? Right, Mark?
Yes. Even that freak on Venice Beach that brings you things to eat, take them. So.
There we go. Coming up right after this, speaking of Venice Beach, coming up right after this, from California, the great Kim Iverson from the Kim Iverson Show will be joining us to finish out the week here on the best damn radio show in the world. The show that brings you not only geographical hints for places around the world, but food hints and politics and drum stuff. We'll be talking some drum stuff with Kim Iverson right after this on The Backstory.
Stuck in traffic? No problem. Stay informed. Stay tuned to Radio Sputnik on 105.5 FM or 1390 AM in the Washington, D.C. area. Need more? Follow us on Facebook or check us out on SputnikNews.com.
They're bringing drugs. They're bringing crime.
I like beer. Yeah, we drank beer.
Whoever's in charge, and I want the record.
Let's talk about that.
Discussing all the controversies and news across the disunited states of America. Tune in to Fault Lines every weekday from 7 to 10 a.m. Eastern, only on Radio Sputnik.
In a media landscape filled with so-called journalists acting as stenographers for their billionaire bosses, there is a desperate need for news, analysis, and perspectives that buck the status quo and get to the heart of how domestic and international events impact you and me, as well as showing how we can get involved in the struggle to change that status quo. Check out By Any Means Necessary on Radio Sputnik, Monday through Friday from 2 to 4 p.m. Eastern, to hear the stories and voices that mainstream media refuses to tell you. And join us as we connect the political, social, and economic movements shaping the world around us. That's By Any Means Necessary, Monday through Friday at 2 to 4 p.m. Eastern, right here on Radio Sputnik.
Hi, I'm political analyst Garland Nixon.
And I'm political scientist, author, and nationally syndicated columnist Dr. Wilmer Leon.
We're the co-hosts for The Critical Hour, airing Monday through Friday from 6 to 8 p.m. Eastern Time here on Radio Sputnik in Washington, D.C.
We close out your day with a thorough and hard-hitting analysis of the day's top stories, where we bring in brilliant scholars, authors, and investigative journalists from around the world.
And on Fridays, it's panel time, when we do a roundup of the week's most important issues.
Join us to keep up with the world's top stories.
Enjoy an in-depth analysis.
And have a little fun along the way. Listen to our show,
The Critical Hour, Monday through Fridays on Radio Sputnik.
We are back, 105.5 FM, AM 1390. I'm investigative journalist Lee Stranahan. This is the best damn radio show in the world. It's The Backstory here on Radio Sputnik. And it is Friday, so it's a frosty Friday. We are joined by Eagle Scout, economist, entrepreneur, educator, and prog rock drummer Mark Frost as our guest host. Always fascinating conversation with Mark. And joining us as a guest right now, also a drummer and political analyst, the great Kim Iverson. Hey, Kim, how you doing?
Hi. Thanks for having me. And I'm in Venice Beach. I know you guys were just talking about Venice Beach, and here I am, looking right at it.
Right. That's.
I'm jealous, Lee. Let me tell you, I'm jealous.
Well,
I want to take my.
Go ahead, Mark.
I just said I want to take a really nerdy book. I want to go out to Venice Beach, and I want to smoke my joint, and I want to only be bothered by the freaks.
Yeah. Well, it's not the same as it used to be.
I have a feeling nothing in California is. That's why I left that place.
Yeah. Yeah.
Now explain that. Fill out that a little bit, Kim. Then I want to talk about you being a chick drummer. But go ahead, Kim. Explain what you're talking about with Venice.
Well, just so you know, regarding the freaks, they used to have this freak show, and now it's gone. They shut it down. So that was like one of the biggest draws of Venice Beach, was that you'd walk by and there would be the freak show, which would be like, a bearded lady, and it was like a freak show. And they would stand outside, and you never knew who you were going to see when you walked by, and they were trying to entice you to come in, but they closed that down, and I think it's actually, there's a Starbucks there now instead. So that's Venice Beach for you. Yeah, that's what's happened.
Is there still a chainsaw juggler?
There hasn't been much of any sort of performer down on the beach since the pandemic. And even before that, there were changes going on the boardwalk where just, like I said, all of those businesses, those kind of cool businesses, they were leaving and closing down. And there's just been a bunch of empty buildings for a really long time. And so actually a lot of the performers were no longer really there because people weren't really coming to the boardwalk as much to like shop and do things. And then with the pandemic, of course, they closed it all. No one could really do anything. And they even closed off parking for a while. So people couldn't come to the beach and hang out unless you lived around here. Then you could walk to it, of course. But yeah, there's been a lot of change. Well, because Snapchat and Google came in and they bought up a ton of the buildings. And then when they bought up the buildings, all the rents went way up for everybody else. And numerous businesses that I had been going to for years, they'd closed down. And it's because they would tell me that their rent would triple when their contracts were up. They had these long contracts. Usually businesses would have really long rental leases, like 20 years or something. And then they would triple, and they just could not afford that. So yeah, it's crazy.
It is the way, unfortunately, things go. Because now, how's Muscle Beach? Is that still a thing?
I mean, it's there, but again, you don't unless it's like a scheduled competition, you're going to see something. You don't really, whenever you go by Muscle Beach, I mean, the equipment's there, but there's just no one really there. It's really boring now down there. I mean, what's that?
No, go ahead, Kim.
Yeah, I mean, it's just, obviously Venice Beach. I moved to Venice Beach in 2013. And of course, when people would come to visit me in LA, they'd always want to visit Venice Beach. And it was really cool for a while, but then it started to really change. I would say 5 years after I moved there, it started to drastically change. The homelessness problem significantly increased. They have, however, begun cleaning it up. So there's not nearly as big of a problem anymore because they actually started moving the homeless people. And that was something that was a huge, people are up in arms about it. You had all of these, ironically, all of these people who were considering, calling themselves activists, and they were actually fighting against moving the homeless into homes.
I want to help
it was
the homeless,
so dumb.
It's not in my neighborhood,
Well, no, they didn't even want, these activists were saying they didn't even want them moved into, they were upset. Some of them, everybody came from a different angle on it, but everybody was fighting against them getting a home. It was the strangest thing. So you had the residents where the homes were being put because they were taking these empty parking lots. Like there was a large empty parking lot that used to be used for like Metro bus parking. And then they stopped parking the buses there. They moved the buses further away. And they wanted to turn that parking lot into like a place where they could put little homes, right, for, little temporary kind of homes for homeless people. And the residents, of course, fought against that. They absolutely did not want that there because then they felt like, then it's a permanent situation. But I'm like, look, the homeless on the boardwalk is a permanent situation. And then, so you had that faction. They didn't want people there because they were like, I pay a lot of money to live by the beach, and now you're going to give them these little homes and keep them here permanently. But then there was this other group, and they were they were just as loud, and they were angry that people were moving them off the beach, out of their tents. They felt like it was a human rights abuse to move them and to say you could no longer be here. They felt like, why can't a person have the right to be on the beach if they want to be on the beach? And they were fighting and moving them from the beach and also from parks. There were some other, areas of Los Angeles that held these encampments in the parks, and activists were mad that they were actually cleaning up the parks, moving the homeless people.
Yes, and some of the places in these parks, for instance, like MacArthur Park, yes, it is melting in the dark, but MacArthur Park, if people had only heard about it from the song, MacArthur Park was in a very sketchy area in the past few years. Last time I was there, it was not a great neighborhood anymore. There was a very good deli right by there. But MacArthur Park was not in an area, it was not, as they say, cute. It was not a cute neighborhood. You know what I'm talking about, Kim?
I'm not actually familiar with Mark. Is that like somewhere not on the west side of LA? Because I pretty much only stay on my, that's how Los Angeles is. Nobody wants to drive anywhere. So we kind of stay in our little spots, and it's like I haven't been over to the west, to like West Hollywood area or, anywhere near Fairfax in like 4 years.
It just doesn't happen, An unspoken law of the universe.
Yeah.
In fact, the only thing I know about Venice is it's near, and you'll get this, Mark, maybe. It's near Marina del Rey. And my friend Glenn Bartels, his dad, Bill Bartels, owns the biggest celebrity Harley dealership, Bartels Harley Davidson, in Marina del Rey, Mark.
Oh, interesting. Yeah, that's just down the street. Yeah, I moved actually to Marina del Rey, technically. So now that's where, but I was in Venice for 7 years, and then I moved out of Venice, and now I'm in Marina del Rey.
So you've seen Bartels, I'm sure, because it's on the main drag right there.
Yeah, and, it's right on Venice Boulevard. I mean, it's on Lincoln Boulevard. Mm-hmm.
That's exactly right. It's on Lincoln. And that's the shop, by the way, where Gary Busey and Billy Idol both crashed their bikes back in the late 80s. Remember that, Mark? There was like, whenever the celebrities would have bike accidents, it would be out in front of Bartels.
Yeah, so it seems like it was always, And
it was. And so Glenn Bartels, I actually moved out to L.A. with Glenn from Massachusetts. He'd never met his dad. And it turned out his dad was the biggest Harley dealer in L.A. So then he met him. And his dad did the right thing and helped. He didn't just be like, who the hell are you? He was like, okay. Because his dad was a biker. So, he knew some ladies. I'm just saying.
That's cool. That's cool.
But Bill set Glenn up in business there. He owned the scooter dealership and the Harley rental place that was next to Bartels for a long time. And and then he goes out to Sturgis all the time, by the way, Mark. He's my friend. He drives up from Marina del Rey up to Sturgis, South Dakota with his brothers, and it's a fun trip for him. So there you go. But Kim, let's talk about you being a drummer for a second. And let me tell you the weird part. Now, and here's why. Whenever I hear about chick drummers, and that would be you, because you're a chick, and I say that with all respect. I like chicks. But drums are, to me, they're an inherently aggressive instrument. Mark, would you agree with me on that? You're hitting things with sticks, right? Isn't there a certain amount of, like, do you get any stress relief from hitting your drums, Mark? Be honest.
Of course. Yeah. In fact, think about it. You have a little kid in a room full of musical instruments. What does it say about the little kid that immediately migrates to the ones with the sticks? I want to hit things.
And so, and Kim, you're not just a chick, but you also seem like a pretty mellow chick. You don't seem like you've got a lot of pent-up aggression. When I think Kim Iverson, and by the way, there are some female drummers. The chick who filled in after Tommy Lee left Motley Crue, she's aggressive. Yeah. You know what I'm talking about. She's aggressive.
Right.
And doesn't hide it. But you seem pretty mellow, Kim. Am I wrong?
No, I mean, I'm a jazz drummer, so it's a bit different. More mellow.
Hey, Lee, let's see if you really know your drummers. My favorite drummer living is Carl Palmer. My second favorite living drummer is a woman. Who is she? She's a jazz drummer. Jazz fusion. He's one of the best drummers, period. Forget male, female. He's probably a top.
I feel like this is an easy one. This has got to be like, I mean, I think is this the easy one? Is this the easy answer? Or is this like a more obscure answer?
Well, if you're a drummer, it shouldn't be that obscure.
Right. I mean, well, okay.
I'll give you a hint. I think I'm going Japanese. Senri Kawaguchi, best drummer by year.
Really?
She's probably the best drummer on earth. Carl Palmer's getting too old to do what he used to do, but you should check her out. Senri, Senri Kawaguchi. Senri Kawaguchi. Amazing drummer. Absolutely amazing. So she's probably the best drummer on earth today.
There's a lot of interesting progressive Japanese bands now. I forget the name of the band, but there's one band. They're very interesting. They're very progressive, almost in a Crimson-y way, sort of late 70s, early 80s Crimson-y. And do you know what I'm talking about?
Yeah. Now that you mentioned it, you know what's out there. You know what's coming in March, don't you?
No.
You triggered this. In March, in the Court of the Crimson King, the documentary is being released. The trailer is all over. The trailer is all over YouTube and social media, but it's a documentary on the 50 years of King Crimson.
Interesting. That should be great. Looking forward to that. Now, Kim, who were your inspirations? Why did you decide to become a drummer? Did you have people who were inspirations, or?
No, I didn't want to be a drummer. It just happened to me, to be honest with you. Like, if I'm going to be totally honest, I wanted to play clarinet. Yeah, and I played clarinet. I played bass clarinet my first year in band when I was a kid. And they didn't allow, in first year of band, they didn't allow any student to be a drummer or a sax player because every kid wants to play saxophone or drums. So they didn't let anybody play any of that. So after the first 2 years of band, so I did bass clarinet for 2 years. After that, then when you transfer to the junior high, they say, okay, now you can audition to be either a drummer or a saxophone player. And I was like, well, maybe, I don't know, I think I'll stick with the clarinet. I like clarinet because my big sister was a clarinetist and I wanted to be just like my sister. But one day the band director came up to me and he said, you should, he's like, I just did all the drum auditions. And he did them for multiple schools that were all feeding into the middle school. And he says, do you want to audition since you're here? And I was like, no. And he says, well, why not? You might as well just try it out, like just audition, and then we'll see how it goes. And I said, okay, fine, since I'm here. So I auditioned, and a couple of weeks later, he came up to me and he said, he's like, I know you didn't really want to audition, but, I auditioned all of these students from all of these various schools. And it turned out that and they were only selecting 4 drummers for the middle school band. He says, not only did you make it, but you're actually first chair. And I was like, ugh. And he's like, why don't you just try it for a year and then see how it goes, And I said, all right, I guess. Thinking that I could go back to clarinet, he totally tricked me. You can't go back. I mean, if you miss 1 year, a band like that, like you're way, everybody's surpassed you. But I was first chair throughout the entire year. I was definitely their best drummer. So I got stuck. And then I had so that was just percussion. And then same thing happened. Going into high school, going into 9th grade, they said, okay, we're doing auditions for the jazz band. So now you're going to play a kit, whereas before I just played percussion. And again, they were having these, the drummer that was not going to be playing in the jazz band anymore because he was going off to high school came up to me and he says, hey, I think you should audition. And I was like, I've never played a kit before in my life. And he's like, well, he's like, it's like not much different than what you're doing standing over here playing snare drum. Like, here's what it is. And he's like, come on, let's go in here and audition right now. The auditions are happening now. And I'd never sat down at a kit. And I played, and once again, I ended up getting selected as being the drummer for the jazz band. And then that happened pretty much every time I auditioned anywhere. Like when I went off to college or anywhere, I would always walk in the room and nobody would ever take me seriously. All the guys would be sitting there and they'd see me and they'd be like, oh, here's this chick. And she thinks she can play drums, and I'd always and then people would ask me about drums. See, I've never been a drum nerd, so I don't know. Like if you say, who's your favorite drummer? I'm like, I don't know. If you say, who's your favorite, whose style do you like? I'm like, I don't even know anybody's style. I just never cared about studying it. I'd listen to other people, but I wouldn't learn, like who was playing on what record and in what band and what style. I just listened, and then I would just mimic what I heard. And so then that, whenever guys, I would sit in the room and the guys would all be like, yeah, this guy's my favorite, that guy. And I'd be like, whatever, I'm just here to play. And I would always just play. And Yeah, I guess I'll toot my own horn a little bit here, but I always got the gigs, and so that I always sent the boys home packing, and that happened. So I went to college with scholarships, playing drums, and was offered to play on tour professionally for a while when I was younger, and I chose not that. I chose to not go down that path and to pursue that lifestyle. And so I haven't played in a very, very long time. So I don't really, I still have kits, I've got 2 kits set up in my house right now, but I never sit down at them. So I'm like, I say at this point, I'm like a faux drummer. I don't even think I could, I have no muscle memory at this point. I'd have to dust off the cobwebs, and I'd have to sit and play every day for like 3 months before I could even like have any chops back at this point.
But it seems like you're blessed with pure raw talent. That's what it sounds like. A sense of rhythm.
Well, my dad's a musician. Yeah.
Yeah,
Maybe.
But my dad was a golf pro. But don't get me on the course because it'd be embarrassing for everybody. So I don't believe in genetics quite going that far. But
also, Lee, it's also a function of just a person's personality. Even if you use something basic like Myers-Briggs, like most drummers are strong intuitives, so they feel their way through rhythms. And that's 80% of it. If you can feel if you can feel like a painter paints with a brush, if you can feel how that drum contributes to the sound, then that's a process of intuition.
Now, yeah, it's been. I had a lot of good times. I lived in New York for a bit, and one time I went into this jazz club called Smoke. Are you familiar with this jazz club, Smoke, in New York City? It's like a real popular. Yeah, it's a classic jazz place. There's another place here in LA that's kind of the same thing, and I had the same sort of experience where I'd go in there and the guys would all look at me and be like, "What is this chick doing here?" And I'd go in for jam, just to jam in their open night, and then I would play and. When I went to Smoke, actually, my friends dragged me in there. I didn't even have sticks. And I asked, I put my name on the list, and then they said, okay, it's your turn. And then I said, can I borrow your sticks? And everybody was looking at me like, oh my God, this is terrible. Like, she didn't even bring her own sticks. This is going to be horrible. But I played, and then at the end of the night, the old cats came up to me and said, you can come back anytime you want, actually. I was like, all right, that's cool.
You hinted at L.A. You're not talking about Baked Potato, are you?
No, I've been up there to see concerts, but no, that's not. It's this other little jazz club in Leimert Park, and it was actually by So, but no, it's not Baked Potato. The Baked Potato is pretty cool though.
Yeah, no, because I lived in NoHo and Burbank, and I lived in that side of the valley, so the Baked Potato was just down the street, so I'm familiar with that. And my brother lives out in Studio Cities. We've talked about before. So that's the part of LA I know. I lived in the West Side a little bit with a girlfriend a long time ago. But now that thing about being intuitive, let's throw your intuition, a pro, Kim, believe it or not. Watch this. This is called a segue. Here I go. Ready? So let's use your intuition to talk about politics. See, that was a segue.
Boy.
Pretty good. Thank you. So
isn't that one of those things you ride?
Politics?
Maybe. So,
yeah, exactly.
So my sense is that we're at a point right now that's very weird. And I'm seeing a lot of things converge right now, whether it's the truck convoy up in Canada, and I'm going to say this CIA thing that broke yesterday, this new revelation about the CIA, and the whole COVID narrative, I think we can all agree, is falling apart. We have governors in blue states like New York dropping mask mandates. They've admitted that the lockdowns had no effect. So I think we're at a point right now where normal people looking around, it's hard to tell what the hell to believe anymore. But what not to believe, which is anything anyone's telling you. And I think the Rogan thing feeds into that too. I think the Russia-Ukraine thing feeds into that. Have you ever seen so many events that were obviously BS sort of come together in a perfect storm of BS? Do you get the same sense, Kim?
Yeah, I mean, it's amazing now. Like when I was on Twitter earlier today and they had this fact check, right? They always have some stupid fact check at the top and, telling people something. And, it's like at the point now where when you scroll through the comments of the fact checks, people are like, yeah, right, whatever. I'm going to believe this. Nobody's believing these fact checks anymore. People aren't believing anything that's coming out of these politicians' mouths. I mean, they've just lost all trust in. I think the majority of Americans now are at the point where they're like, I'll just do my own research, which now gets made fun of, right? I mean, even you'll hear people, oh, yeah, you'll just do your own research on YouTube or something. And it's like, yeah, actually, because I'm probably going to get more accurate information if I do my own research than listen to these ridiculous fact checks that end up not being, for one, even fact checks. When you look at the fact check, it's just so-and-so said so. That's why. It's not true because so-and-so said so.
I was just going to say that's so very, very true. I've even found that the media doesn't even report scientific findings very well. So you'll read a report that was written by a journalist saying what a study said. Then you go get the study and read this actual study, and it didn't say anything like that at all. It said the opposite sometimes. And so I think, anytime you've been in a bad relationship where you get gaslighted over and over and over, and let's face it, politics, politics that involves gaslighting is a toxic, bad relationship. And when all of the institutions that pass for essential in a republic, like the press, government, those sorts of things, when it's hard to believe whether what they're saying is even objective, forget whether it's true, does it just have a rationality behind it of wanting to be true? Or are we purposely practicing cognitive dissonance? That's my problem. And I think the damages of that in the big picture are pretty profound.
Yeah.
Yeah, I think it is very worrying. Kim, do you get a little, because I do think stuff could happen where there is violence, let's say. And I think a lot of people would go, well, yeah, you guys had it. And I think it's a bad position. But do you think things are getting almost to that point, Kim?
I think that they're getting to a point where the government, the powers that be are realizing that people having information is dangerous. And they're trying to figure out a way to limit our information. They didn't really have this problem as much where we would kind of, hear them say something and then we're supposed to just take them at their word. And now we don't take them at their word as much anymore, especially when their word keeps being wrong over and over again. But now we live in an age where the information is coming at us so quickly. We can get information so fast from other sources rather than just like the government sanctioned sources, that I think that they're afraid and they're trying to figure out how censorship can work in their favor in controlling populations. I mean, China's been able to do it. They have a population of 1.5 billion people. And the way they keep their population under somewhat control, China's not the best, actually, as much as people think that China's great at keeping content censored. They're not that great at it, actually, because pretty much everybody in China has a VPN that they use.
Well,
but
let me say this about China. The other way China seems to have tricked people is by having fantastic infrastructure. Like the trains that they have are legit really cool over in China. And
bottom line is if you're happy, you don't care, right? So
right. And I think a lot of people in China are generally, whatever people say about the CCP, the fact is China has improved the lives for people. Mark, you've been over there. You'd agree with that, right?
Yes and no. But there's definitely a non-published large minority there that is very anti-government.
There we go. Great conversation, as usual, with the naturally funky Kim Iverson. Mark Frost joined us, and the great Scott Ritter, legendary. Thanks to everybody for calling in, Tarif and Dan. We'll see you next week on the best damn radio show in the world. This has been The Backstory.
listening to Radio Sputnik. Telling the untold.
Good evening. Welcome to the Critical Hour. We're coming to you from the capital of the United States of America, Washington, D.C., here on Radio Sputnik. I'm political scientist, author, and nationally syndicated columnist Dr. Wilmer Leon. I'm joined here by my co-host, political analyst Garland Nixon.
Thank you, Wilmer.
For the next 2 hours,